Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, each sound marking another heartbeat Jack couldn't take for granted. He sat on the plastic chair beside Lila's hospital bed, his spine straight despite 3 days without proper sleep. His 6-year-old daughter looked small against the white sheets, her dark hair matted with sweat from the fever that had finally broken an hour ago. Jack pressed his palms against his knees and studied the 4-drip feeding antibiotics into Lila's arm. The autoimmune flare-up had hit without warning. One moment, she'd been showing him her latest drawing, a family of wolves in a forest. The next, she was burning with fever and struggling to breathe. "Daddy." Lila's voice came out as a whisper. Jack leaned forward. "I'm right here. Are you going to leave?" "No." He reached for her hand, careful to avoid the foreline. "Not going anywhere." The door opened and June stepped inside, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She carried 2 cups of coffee and looked like she'd been crying again. Her parents followed behind her. Ellery Maris surveyed the hospital room with the same expression she might use for a dirty public restroom. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her expensive coat hung open to reveal a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's rent. Silas Maris stood beside his wife, checking his watch. His gray suit looked fresh from the dry cleaner, and his leather shoes reflected the harsh hospital lights. "How is she?" June asked, handing Jack one of the coffees. "Stable. The antibiotics are working." Ellery glanced at the machines surrounding Lila's bed. "Are you finished being dramatic?" Jack's hand tightened around the coffee cup, but he didn't respond. June stared at her mother. "Mom, she almost died." "Children get sick, June. It's not the end of the world." Ellery pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. "Though I suppose you'll milk this for sympathy." Silas stepped closer to the bed, studying Lila like she was a broken appliance. "She looks terrible. She's 6 years old with a serious medical condition," Jack said, his voice flat. "Exactly." Silas turned to June, lowering his voice, but not enough. "Let her die. She's a burden on you." The words hit the room like a physical force. June gasped. Lila's eyes fluttered open, confusion spreading across her face. Jack set the coffee cup on the bedside table with deliberate care. He didn't look at Silas or Ellery. He didn't speak. He simply sat back in his chair and watched his daughter breathe. But something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and permanent. "Dad, you can't say things like that," June whispered. "I'm being practical. Look at your lives. Look at this mess." Silas gestured around the room. "How many more times will you go through this? How much money will you throw away on treatments that barely work?" Ellery nodded. "We raise you to be smart, June, not emotional." Jack stood up slowly. "Visiting hours are over." "Excuse me." Ellery's eyebrows lifted. "Leave." Silas stepped forward. "You don't get to dismiss us." Jack moved between Silas and Lila's bed. At 6'2", with the build of someone who'd spent years in the military, he didn't need to raise his voice. "Get out. This is our daughter's child," Ellery said. "And she's my daughter. Leave. Now." June touched Jack's arm. "Maybe we should all take a break." Jack looked at his wife for the first time since her parents had spoken. "They're not welcome here anymore." Silas straightened his tie. "Fine, but don't call us when you need help paying the medical bills." They left without saying goodbye to Lila. June sank into the second chair, burying her face in her hands. "They don't mean it. They're just scared." Jack sat back down and took Lila's hand again. He didn't argue with June. Arguments were loud and messy and accomplished nothing. Silence was sharper. The house felt different when they brought Lila home 3 days later. Jack carried her to the couch and tucked a blanket around her legs while June heated soup in the kitchen. The television played a cartoon, but Lila's attention drifted to the window, where afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees. Jack's phone rang. Ellery's name appeared on the screen, but he declined the call. IT rang again immediately. "Aren't you going to answer?" June called from the kitchen. "No." The phone continued ringing throughout the day. Text messages piled up from both Ellery and Silas, each one more demanding than the last. Jack deleted them without reading past the first few words. That evening, while Lila slept and June graded papers at the dining room table. Jack sat at his laptop in the home office. He navigated to Lila's medical portal and began removing names from the emergency contact list. Ellery Maris, deleted. Silas Maris, deleted. The team moved to the insurance authorizations and removed them there too. Every trace of Ellery and Silas disappeared from their daughter's medical care with a few clicks. "What are you doing?" June stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. Jack saved the changes and closed the laptop. "Making sure the people who want our daughter dead can't make decisions about her care." They didn't mean that. Jack accepted the tea but didn't drink it. They said exactly what they meant. They were upset. People say things when they're scared. No. Jack met her eyes. Scared people say they're scared. They ask how they can help. They don't tell you to let your child die. June sat on the edge of the desk. "To my parents. Your parents are dangerous. Choose your child. Or choose them. There's no middle. I don't want to lose everyone." Jack set the tea aside and studied his wife's face. The woman he'd married 9 years ago had been stronger. Or maybe he'd just been blind to how broken she was. "You already did," he said quietly. "You just haven't looked at the wreckage." June's face crumpled. "What does that mean?" "It means you let them talk about killing our daughter, and you're more worried about their feelings than hers. That's not fair." Jack opened the laptop again and pulled up their joint banking account. "I'm moving Lila's medical fund to a separate account. One they can't access or influence." "Jack, you can't just—" "I already did." The transfer had been completed that morning. $50,000 moved to an account with only Jack's name on it. Money they'd saved specifically for Lila's treatments, now protected from whatever financial manipulation the Marises might attempt. June stared at the screen. "You're shutting me out too. I'm protecting our daughter. If you want access to that account, you prove you can put her first." "How?" Jack closed the laptop again. "Cut them off. Completely. No calls, no visits, no family dinners. Nothing. They'll never forgive me." "Good." June left the room without another word. Jack heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the bedroom door closing. He sat alone in the dark office, planning. Jack remembered the first time he'd met the Marises. June had warned him they were particular about appearances, but he thought she meant they preferred nice restaurants and dressed well. That he'd been wrong. The dinner was at their house in the hills above Ashland, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and views of the valley. Jack had worn his best shirt and brought flowers for Ellery, wine for Silas. "So you're the soldier," Silas had said, not offering to shake hands. "Former combat medic," Jack had corrected. "Same thing." Ellery had accepted the flowers with the enthusiasm someone might show for a dead fish. "June mentioned you work with your hands now." "I make furniture." "How rustic." She'd handed the flowers to June without looking at them again. The evening had continued downhill from there. Every question felt like an interrogation. Every answer he gave was met with polite disdain. They'd asked about his family background, his income, his long-term prospects. June had apologized afterward. "They just want what's best for me." Jack had believed her then. He'd been young enough to think love could overcome anything, including her parents' obvious disapproval. The disapproval had turned to hostility when June got pregnant. They'd suggested she was too young and not ready for children. When she'd refused to consider their alternatives, they'd shifted tactics. "What kind of life can you give a child?" Ellery had asked during a tense dinner when June was 7 months pregnant. "Living in that tiny house, struggling financially." "We're not struggling," June had protested. Yet, Silas had cut his steak with surgical precision. "Children are expensive, especially if something goes wrong." Something had gone wrong. Lila's diagnosis had come when she was 3 years old, after months of infections and unexplained fevers. The autoimmune condition was rare and complex, requiring specialists and treatments that insurance only partially covered. The Marises had helped with some of the medical bills, but every check came with lectures about better planning and accepting reality. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," Ellery had told June after a particularly difficult hospitalization. Jack had bitten his tongue. For 3 years, he'd bitten his tongue and swallowed his anger and told himself he was keeping the peace for June's sake. He was done keeping peace. Now, sitting in his office with Lila finally sleeping peacefully upstairs, Jack opened a new browser window and began researching. The Maris family had money, but money left trails. Charitable donations, tax records, property holdings, everything public and searchable. Jack had learned patience in the military. He'd learned to wait for the right moment, gather intelligence, and strike with precision. The Marises thought they were untouchable because they'd always been untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. The financial auditor's name was Rebecca Torres, and she specialized in forensic accounting for high-net-worth families. Her office in downtown Ashland was small but organized, with filing cabinets that looked like they could withstand a nuclear blast. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked, reviewing the documents Jack had brought. "Inconsistencies. The Maris Family Trust claims significant charitable donations, but I want to know where the money actually goes." Rebecca spread the papers across her desk. Tax returns, donation receipts, property records. "This could take weeks. I have time. It could also be expensive." Jack pulled out his checkbook. "How expensive?" 3 weeks later, Rebecca called with results. "You need to come in." Jack drove to her office during his lunch break, leaving a half-finished dining table in his workshop. Rebecca had 3 banker's boxes of documents waiting for him. "The short version," she said, "is that your in-laws are playing some very creative games with their money." She opened the first box and pulled out a thick folder. The Maris Family Trust claims to donate 6 figures annually to children's charities. But most of these charities are just shell organizations that funnel money back to family members or pay for personal expenses. Is that illegal? Some of it, yes. At minimum, it's tax fraud. At worst, it's wire fraud and money laundering. Jack studied the documents. Names of charities he'd never heard of, addresses that led to empty offices, board members who were all Maris family friends. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "The trust owns several properties that are listed as rental income, but they're actually vacation homes used exclusively by family. That's also fraud. What about the land they own with me?" Rebecca pulled out a different folder. "That's interesting. The trust defaulted on property taxes 18 months ago. Under Oregon law, any co-owner can assume full ownership by paying the back taxes and penalties." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. "How much?" $43,000. The land was worth 3 times that amount. It included the summer house where the Marises hosted their annual family gatherings, the place where June's grandfather had built his fortune in timber. "If I pay the taxes, the property becomes yours entirely. The trust loses all claims." Jack wrote another check. Meanwhile, June was falling apart. The therapy sessions Dr. Martinez had recommended weren't helping. If anything, they seemed to make things worse. June would come home from appointments red-eyed and defensive, insisting that working through family trauma would take time. "They love me," she said after a particularly difficult session. "They just don't know how to show it." Jack was building kitchen cabinets for a client and didn't look up from his measuring. "Love doesn't tell you to let your child die. Dr. Martinez says I need to set boundaries, not cut them off entirely." Dr. Martinez didn't hear what they said. "I could arrange a family session. We could all talk together." Jack set down his tape measure and faced his wife. "No, Jack, please. They're the only family I have left. You have me. You have Lila. But if I lose them..." "You lost them the day they chose cruelty over love. You're just afraid to admit it." June's face flushed. "You're making me choose. I'm not making you do anything. I'm telling you I won't watch them poison our daughter with their hatred. So what are you saying?" Jack picked up his tape measure again. "I'm saying you need to decide what kind of mother you want to be." That evening, Jack called Kendra Baines, the family attorney who'd handled their wills and property transfers. Kendra was known for her calm approach and surgical precision in negotiations. "I need to file for divorce," he told her. "Are you sure? These things can get complicated with a child involved." "I'm sure. What are the grounds?" Jack explained about Lila's hospitalization, the Maris's cruelty, and June's inability to protect their daughter from her parents' manipulation. Kendra took notes in silence. When he finished, she set down her pen. "I'll need documentation. Medical records, evidence of the emotional abuse, proof that June allowed her parents inappropriate access to Lila's care." "I have all of that." "Good. But Jack, you need to understand, this won't be easy. June will fight for custody, and family courts tend to favor mothers. Not if the mother is putting the child at risk. Kendra nodded slowly. Let me review everything you have. We'll build a case that shows June's inability to establish appropriate boundaries with her parents constitutes a danger to Lila's well-being. Jack left the meeting feeling lighter than he had in months. For the first time since Lila's diagnosis, he was taking action instead of just enduring. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning while June was getting ready for work. The process server was polite but firm, waiting while she signed for the documents with shaking hands. Jack was in his workshop when she found him. The papers clutched against her chest like armor. You did it, she said. You actually did it. Jack didn't stop sanding the table leg he was working on. I told you I would. I thought you were bluffing. I don't bluff. June sank into the chair he kept near his workbench, the same chair where Lila liked to sit and watch him work. What about Lila? What about her? You're taking her away from me. Jack set down the sandpaper and faced his wife. I'm protecting her from people who want her dead. My parents don't. Your parents told us to let her die. You heard them. Lila heard them. June's face went white. She was unconscious. No, she wasn't. She opened her eyes right when your father said it. For a moment, June looked like she might be sick. Then her face hardened. This is about money, isn't it? You want me to lose my inheritance. Jack had been expecting this. The Marises had probably spent the last 3 weeks filling June's head with poison about his real motives. I don't want anything from your parents. I never have. Then why are you doing this? Jack picked up another piece of sandpaper and resumed working. Because our daughter deserves a parent who puts her first. I do put her first. No, you put your parents' feelings first. You put your own fear first. Lila comes third, maybe fourth. June stood up, the divorce papers crumpling in her grip. I'm going to fight this. Good. Fight it. 2 days later, Jack's phone rang. Kendra's name appeared on the screen. We have a problem, she said. June hired Davidson, Klein, and Associates. Jack recognized the name. One of the most expensive family law firms in the region. The kind that charged $1,000 an hour and had never met a dirty trick they wouldn't use. How could she afford that? She can't. But her parents can. Of course. The Marises were already funding June's defense, which meant they were essentially funding their own custody grab. They'd never cared about Lila before, but they wouldn't tolerate losing control of June. Does that change anything? Jack asked. It means we need to be perfect. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence has to be bulletproof. Whatever it takes. Kendra was quiet for a moment. Jack, there's something else. They're going to claim you're unstable. Post-traumatic stress from your military service, financial pressure from Lila's medical bills, maybe even domestic violence. Jack felt his jaw tighten. I've never touched June in anger. I know, but they'll find witnesses who say you have a temper, that you're controlling, that you've isolated June from her family. They isolated themselves when they told us to let our daughter die. We have to prove that. And we have to prove that June's failure to protect Lila from that kind of psychological abuse makes her an unfit parent. Jack stared out his workshop window at the yard where Lila liked to play. A small swing hung from the oak tree, moving gently in the afternoon breeze. What do you need from me? Everything. Phone records, financial statements, medical records, but also character witnesses. People who've seen how you interact with Lila, how June interacts with her parents. Jack thought about the handful of friends they had in common. The neighbors who'd watched him carry Lila to the car during medical emergencies. The teachers who'd seen him at every school event while June worked late. I can get that. Good. Because you're not just walking away from this marriage, Jack. You're taking the entire ground they stand on. The therapy session lasted 2 hours. Dr. Martinez had agreed to see June on an emergency basis after she'd called, sobbing, from her car in the courthouse parking lot. Tell me what happened, Dr. Martinez said. June sat curled in the chair, her knees pulled up to her chest. Jack filed for divorce. He wants sole custody. How do you feel about that? Terrified, angry, confused. June wiped her eyes with a tissue. I don't understand how we got here. Let's start with your daughter's hospitalization. You mentioned your parents visited. June nodded. They were worried about Lila. What did they say that worried them? Just parent things. Concerns about the medical bills, the impact on our lives. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. June, I need you to be specific. What exactly did they say? For several minutes, June deflected. She talked about her parents' protective instincts and their practical concerns. She insisted they were misunderstood and not good at expressing emotions. June, Dr. Martinez said finally, what did your father say about Lila? The question hung in the air like smoke. June stared at her hands, her breathing shallow. He said, she stopped, swallowed hard. He said to let her die, that she was a burden. And how did that make you feel? Sick, horrified, but also, June's voice dropped to a whisper. Also familiar. Familiar how they've always talked like that. About problems, about people who don't meet their standards. I thought it was just how they dealt with stress. Dr. Martinez wrote something in her notebook. June, when you were growing up, how did your parents respond when you were sick or struggling? The floodgates opened. June talked about childhood illnesses dismissed as attention-seeking, about emotional needs met with lectures about being dramatic, about achievements that were never quite good enough, failures that were evidence of fundamental character flaws. They told me love was conditional, she said, tears streaming down her face, that I had to earn their approval by being perfect. And when Lila was born with health challenges, they acted like it was my fault, like I'd failed at the most basic thing, having a healthy child. Dr. Martinez set down her pen. June, I want you to hear your own words. You just said your parents told you to let your child die because they didn't want to be inconvenienced. June's face went white. When you say it like that, that's what happened, isn't it? June nodded slowly, horror dawning in her eyes. Oh God, oh my God, what are you thinking? I defended them. Even after they said that about Lila, I made excuses for them. Why do you think you did that? June doubled over, sobbing. Because I've been making excuses for them my whole life. Because I thought if I could just be good enough, love them enough, they'd finally love me back. And now, June raised her head, her face streaked with tears, but her voice stronger than it had been in months. Now I know they're never going to love me. Not really, because they don't know how. That evening, June called her parents. Jack heard her voice through the bedroom door, growing louder and shakier as the conversation progressed. No, Mom, I'm not being dramatic. Yes, I heard what Dad said. Of course I remember. You told me to let my daughter die. Jack sat on the couch with Lila, helping her with a puzzle while they listened to June finally find her voice. I don't care if you didn't mean it that way. I don't care if you were scared. You don't say things like that about a 6-year-old child. Lila looked up from the puzzle. Is Mommy okay? She's figuring some things out, Jack said. Because I was sick. Jack met his daughter's eyes. At 6, she understood more than any child should have to. Sometimes people say mean things when they're scared. Your mom is telling them that wasn't okay. Lila nodded and went back to her puzzle. Upstairs, June's voice cracked. No, you listen to me. For once in my life, you're going to listen. You walked into that hospital and looked at my dying child like she was garbage. You told me to give up on her. And then you acted like I was the problem for being upset. Jack heard something crash. Probably June throw her phone out a few minutes later. She came downstairs. Her eyes were red and swollen, but something had changed in her posture. She looked more solid, more present. I cut them off, she said. Jack nodded. Good, but it's too late, isn't it? For us, I mean. Jack looked at his daughter, who was pretending to focus on her puzzle while listening to every word. We'll see. But privately, Jack knew the answer. June had chosen too late. He'd already moved on emotionally, already started planning a life without her. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. The letter arrived on a Thursday, delivered by certified mail to the mayor's family home. Silas signed for it himself, probably expecting legal documents related to June's divorce. Instead, he found a notice of property transfer. Jack got the call 20 minutes later. What the hell is this? Silas's voice was tight with fury. Jack was installing hinges on a cabinet door, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. Legal document. Says right at the top. You can't just steal our property. I didn't steal anything. I paid the back taxes you defaulted on. Oregon law is pretty clear about co-ownership rights. Silence. Jack could practically hear Silas's brain working, trying to find a way out of the trap he'd walked into. "We'll fight this in court. Good luck. I have all the paperwork. Tax records showing 18 months of missed payments, certified mail you ignored, legal notices you threw away." More silence. "What do you want?" Silas asked finally. Jack set down his screwdriver. "I want you to remember that actions have consequences. This is about money. You're just another gold digger who—" Jack hung up. The phone rang again immediately. He declined the call. Ellery tried next, her voice shrill with indignation. "You can't do this to us. That land has been in our family for 3 generations. Should have paid your taxes. We'll sue you into the ground." "With what lawyers?" "The ones you're already paying for June's custody case." Click. The Marises had made their first mistake, underestimating their opponent. They'd seen Jack as a blue-collar nobody who'd gotten lucky marrying above his station. They'd never bothered to learn about his background, his intelligence, or his capacity for long-term planning. Their second mistake was believing their money made them untouchable. Their third mistake was threatening his daughter. Now they were about to learn the cost of all 3. That weekend, Jack drove out to the property with Lila. It was 40 acres of old-growth forest with a creek running through the middle. The summer house sat on a bluff overlooking the valley, a sprawling structure that had hosted decades of Maris family gatherings. "Are we going to live here?" Lila asked, skipping stones into the creek. "No, but it's ours now." "What about the house?" Jack studied the building. It was well-constructed, but outdated, full of expensive furniture and family photographs spanning generations. A monument to Maris family pride. "I haven't decided yet." But he had. He just wanted to savor the moment a little longer. They came on a Tuesday afternoon while Jack was working in his shop. He heard the car doors slam and knew, without looking, that the Marises had finally decided on a direct approach. Silas entered first, his face flushed with anger. Ellery followed, her usual composed mask cracked with fury. "We need to talk," Silas said. Jack continued, sanding a table leg. "No, we don't. You stole our property. I followed the law. You manipulated the law. There's a difference." Jack set down his sandpaper and faced them both. In his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the furniture he'd built with his own hands, he felt completely in control. "You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about what you said to my wife about our daughter." Ellery lifted her chin. "We were being realistic. You were being cruel. That child will drain your resources for the rest of your lives," Silas said. "We were trying to help June see reason. By telling her to let Lila die. By helping her understand that some battles can't be won." Jack stepped closer. At 6'2", he towered over both of them. And for the first time, he saw something like fear flicker in Silas's eyes. "You walked down on a dying child. You mocked your own daughter's pain. You used silence as your weapon." Jack's voice was deadly quiet. "I just returned the favor with paperwork." "You're nothing." Ellery spat. "A jumped-up soldier who thinks he can play in our league." Jack smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Your league? Let's see. Your charitable donations are fraudulent. Your rental properties are tax shelters. Your family trust is a shell game designed to hide assets from the IRS." Both Marises went pale. "That's right. I had you audited. Every transaction, every transfer, every creative interpretation of tax law. All documented and ready for review." Silas's voice cracked. "You can't prove anything." Jack walked to his workbench and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, I can prove everything. 18 months of forensic accounting will do that." He tossed the folder at Silas's feet. Papers scattered across the workshop floor: bank statements, tax documents, legal analyses. "The IRS will find this very interesting. So will the state attorney general's office." Ellery stared at the documents like they were poisonous snakes. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. You thought you could destroy my family because you have money and influence. You thought I'd just take it because I needed your approval." Jack stepped back, giving them room to breathe, but not to escape. "But I don't need your approval. I don't need your money. And I definitely don't need your presence in my daughter's life. You can't keep us from seeing her," Silas said. "Watch me. June will fight this. She'll never forgive you for cutting us out." Jack shrugged. "June made her choice, when she let you call our daughter a burden. I'm making mine now." Ellery's voice turned venomous. "You'll regret this. We have friends, connections. We can make your life very difficult. Go ahead. Try." Jack opened the workshop door and gestured for them to leave. "You have 1 week to clear your belongings out of the summer house. After that, I'm donating it." "Donating it to who?" Silas demanded. Jack's smile returned, colder than before. "The Children's Hospital. They're building a new pediatric wing. Lila's name will be on the plaque." The Marises left without another word. The news story broke 3 weeks later. "Local family under investigation for tax fraud," ran on the front page of the Ashland Daily Tidings. The article was brief but damaging, noting that the Maris Family Trust was being investigated by multiple agencies for irregularities in charitable donations and property reporting. Jack read it over coffee while Lila ate cereal at the kitchen table. June had moved out the week before, taking only her clothes and personal items. The divorce proceedings were moving faster than expected, with June's expensive lawyers advising her to accept Jack's custody proposal rather than fight a battle they couldn't win. "Daddy, why are people talking about Grandma and Grandpa on the news?" Lila asked. Jack folded the newspaper. "Sometimes when people don't follow the rules, they get in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that makes other people not want to be around them anymore." Lila nodded seriously and went back to her cereal. At 6, she had an unusual capacity for accepting complex truths without needing extensive explanations. The social consequences came swiftly. The Marises had built their reputation on charitable work and community involvement, but the investigation revealed that most of their charity was self-serving tax avoidance. Board positions disappeared overnight. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends became suddenly busy. The Shakespeare Festival, where Ellery had served as a board member for 15 years, asked for her resignation. The country club where Silas played golf twice a week suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Jack watched their social destruction with the same dispassionate attention he'd once used to monitor enemy positions. Every lost friendship, every canceled invitation, every whispered conversation was noted and cataloged that they'd used social pressure as a weapon against him for years. Now they were learning how sharp that weapon could be when turned around. The legal consequences were more complex but equally satisfying. The IRS audit would take months to complete, but early findings suggested significant penalties and back taxes. The state investigation into fraudulent charity claims was moving toward criminal charges. Silas hired the best white-collar defense attorney in Oregon, which cost him more per month than Jack made in a year. Ellery developed stress-related health problems that required expensive specialists. Their golden years were turning to ash, and everyone in Ashland could smell the smoke. The final blow came when Jack followed through on his threat about the summer house. Rather than sell it or move into it, he had it demolished. Every stick of furniture, every family photograph, every piece of Maris family history was destroyed or donated to charity. The land was then gifted to the Children's Hospital with a conservation easement that prevented future development. A small plaque near the creek read, "The Lila Halvorsen Memorial Forest in honor of children who fight battles they shouldn't have to fight." Jack drove out to see it on a Sunday afternoon, bringing Lila with him. She ran between the trees while he sat on a bench he'd built near the plaque. "It's pretty here," she said, collecting pine cones in her jacket pockets. "Yes, it is. Are we going to come here a lot?" "Whenever you want." Lila nodded and went back to her exploring. She'd adapted to her parents' divorce with remarkable resilience, probably because her life had actually become more stable and peaceful without the constant tension of her mother's family drama. That Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Kendra. "Custody finalized. You have sole physical and legal custody. June gets supervised visitation pending completion of therapy program." Jack typed back, "Good." He'd won, completely and decisively. The Marises were financially ruined, socially ostracized, and legally powerless. June was cut off from her parents and struggling to rebuild her relationship with her daughter through court-mandated therapy. Jack felt no satisfaction in their destruction, no joy in their pain. He felt only the quiet peace that came from knowing his daughter was safe. The custody hearing had been brief and one-sided. June's lawyers presented their case for shared custody, emphasizing her love for Lila and her efforts to separate from her parents' influence. Jack's lawyer presented evidence. Phone records showing June's continued contact with her parents despite promising to cut them off. Medical records showing Lila's stress-related symptoms worsening during visits to the mayor's house. Testimony from teachers, neighbors, and medical professionals about Jack's consistent presence in Lila's life versus June's increasing absences. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. The court finds that the minor child's best interests are served by awarding sole physical and legal custody to the father, with supervised visitation for the mother pending successful completion of a court-approved therapy program. June had cried. Her parents, sitting in the gallery behind her, had stormed out before the judge finished speaking. Jack had simply nodded and started planning their new life. That life took shape quickly. Without the chaos of family drama and custody battles, Jack's furniture business thrived. Word of mouth brought him more clients than he could handle, wealthy families who appreciated craftsmanship and reliability. He hired an assistant, then expanded his workshop. Lila had her own corner where she could draw and do homework while he worked. Their evenings fell into comfortable routines. Dinner together, help with homework, stories before bed. Weekend mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Saturday afternoons were for errands and activities. Sunday afternoons were for visiting the Memorial Forest or exploring new hiking trails. Jack taught Lila to identify trees, track animals, and read the weather in cloud formations. She taught him about her favorite books, her art projects, and the complex social dynamics of first grade. Emma's parents are getting divorced, she told him one evening while they build a puzzle together. How does Emma feel about that? Sad, but also kind of relieved because they used to fight a lot. Jack looked at his daughter's serious face. How do you feel about our divorce? Lila considered this carefully. Sad that Mommy doesn't live here anymore, but not sad that Grandma and Grandpa don't come over. Why not sad about that? Because they made you angry. And when you're angry, I feel scared. Jack set down his puzzle piece. I'm sorry you felt scared. It's okay. You never yelled or threw things. You just got really quiet and still like a statue. And that scared you. A little. But I knew you wouldn't hurt me. I just knew something bad was going to happen to the people who made you angry. Jack pulled his daughter into his lap. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just us now. I know. That's why I'm not scared anymore. June's supervised visits happened twice a week at a family counseling center downtown. Jack dropped Lila off and picked her up, exchanging polite greetings with his ex-wife, but nothing more. The visits were difficult at first. June was hurt and defensive, trying to explain why she'd made mistakes without admitting she'd actually endangered their daughter. Lila was confused and sometimes upset after sessions. But slowly, as June progressed through her therapy program and started accepting responsibility for her choices, the visits improved. She stopped making excuses for her parents and started focusing on rebuilding her relationship with Lila. Mommy said she was sorry for not protecting me from Grandma and Grandpa, Lila reported after one visit. How did that make you feel? Better, but also confused because I don't really remember them protecting me from anything anyway. Jack nodded. Sometimes adults take a long time to figure out what they should have known all along. Are you still angry at Mommy? Jack considered the question. Not angry, just sad that it took so long for her to choose you first. But she's choosing me now. She's trying to. That's why she's working with a counselor. Lila seemed satisfied with this explanation and went back to her coloring book. The truth was more complicated. Jack wasn't angry at June anymore, but he wasn't interested in reconciliation either. Too much damage had been done. Too much trust had been broken. June could work on being a better mother, and Jack hoped she would succeed for Lila's sake. But their marriage was over, and Jack felt no desire to resurrect it. Lila's 8th birthday party was everything her previous parties hadn't been: small, relaxed, and genuinely joyful. Jack had initially planned to rent a venue, but Lila requested they have it at home. I want to show my friends my room and your workshop and the swing in the backyard. So they transformed the house and yard into Party Central. Streamers hung from the oak tree, balloons clustered around the porch, and a small table held presents wrapped in bright paper. 8 kids from Lila's class arrived with their parents, most of whom Jack had met through school events or playdates. Kendra came with her teenage daughter, bringing homemade cupcakes and staying to help supervise games. June attended with her court-appointed supervisor, a kind woman named Michelle who specialized in family reunification. It was awkward at first, but June focused on Lila and avoided trying to insert herself into conversations with other parents. The party games were simple hide-and-seek, tag, a treasure hunt Jack had designed around the yard. Lila laughed until her sides hurt, her face flushed with happiness and excitement. "This is the best birthday ever," she announced during lunch, chocolate cake smeared around her mouth. Jack smiled and handed her a napkin. "Better than Chuck E. Cheese?" "Way better. At Chuck E. Cheese, you can't show people your dad's workshop." After the other kids left, after June and Michelle said goodbye, after the cleanup was finished, Jack and Lila sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. "I have one more present for you," Jack said, "but I already opened everything." Jack pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. It was smooth and perfectly fitted, with tiny hinges he'd crafted by hand. Lila opened it carefully. Inside was a wooden sculpture of a wolf standing protectively over a smaller wolf, both carved with intricate detail. The larger wolf's eyes were alert and fierce, while the smaller one looked up with trust and love. "You made this," Lila breathed. "I made it for you." She lifted the sculpture carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's us, isn't it? What do you think?" "I think the big wolf is you, and the little wolf is me." Jack nodded. "You're never alone, Lila. No matter what anyone says, no matter what happens, you'll never be alone." Lila hugged the sculpture to her chest. "I know, Daddy. I've always known." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell around them. In the distance, lights began to appear in windows throughout their neighborhood, other families settling in for the evening, other children being tucked into bed by parents who loved them. Jack thought about the Marises, probably sitting in their diminished house, counting their legal fees and wondering how their carefully constructed world had collapsed so completely. He thought about June, returning to her small apartment to write another letter to Lila that might or might not receive a response. He thought about all the people who tried to tell him that family was everything, that forgiveness was healing, that holding grudges only hurt yourself. They'd been wrong. Some people didn't deserve forgiveness. Some relationships weren't worth saving. Sometimes the healthiest thing you could do was cut out the poison and let the wound heal clean. Jack had protected his daughter from people who wanted to destroy her. He destroyed those people in return. He'd chosen love over loyalty, truth over peace, and his child's future over his wife's feelings. And sitting on his porch with Lila safe in his arms, Jack knew he'd made the right choice. 3 years later, Jack received a wedding invitation in the mail. June was remarrying a teacher she'd met in her therapy group, a man who understood the work she'd done to rebuild herself. Jack sent a nice gift and his genuine wishes for their happiness. Lila was 9 now, thriving in school and showing real artistic talent. She spent alternating weekends with June and her new stepfather, relationships that had slowly healed into something healthy and supportive. The Marises had moved to Arizona after their legal troubles were resolved. They'd lost most of their money to fines and legal fees, lost their social standing entirely, and lost their daughter and granddaughter permanently. Jack never heard from them again. That he built furniture, raised his daughter, and planted trees in the memorial forest every year on Lila's birthday. The oak tree in their backyard grew taller, the swing hung lower, and life moved forward in the quiet rhythm of ordinary happiness. Sometimes, late at night, Jack would walk through his house and feel the peace that came from keeping promises. He'd promised to protect his daughter, and he had. He'd promised to make the people who hurt her pay for their cruelty, and he hadn't screamed or forgiven or moved on or let go. He'd simply made sure they lost everything they cared about while he kept everything that mattered. The wolf had won, and every day they breathed, the Marises remembered what it cost to threaten his cub.